First Peter discusses Christ's ministry to the spirits in prison in chapter 3, verses 17 through 20, and chapter 4, verse 6. This first comes up in a larger discussion within 1 Peter of suffering for doing right versus suffering for doing wrong. In Peter's view, it is clearly better that the saints should suffer for doing what's right, and this is a view that is far more applicable than any of us would prefer in the present world. For Peter, this is because in sufferings for well-doing, we emulate Christ. Beginning with verse 17, "For it is better if the will of God be so, that ye suffer for well-doing, than for evil-doing. For Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit, by which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison, which sometime were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water." So for Christ, unjust suffering and even an unjust death were not merely exercises in patience and long-suffering, but rather vehicles to further opportunities to minister. And to whom did he minister? Spirits, as he was a spirit. And where were they? They were described as being in prison. Which spirits were in this prison? Peter tells us that they include at least the dead from a particular incident of biblical destruction. But given that the flood victims were not particularly unique, united together as they were by little more than skepticism about Noah's boat-building project, we can reasonably suppose that this ministry served an important purpose for all those who died without fully embracing the gospel, not to mention those who had not received even the rudiments of the word. And why did the Savior undertake this ministry? 1 Peter 4:6 tells us, "For this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit." It is requisite with the justice of God that his children should receive the word, whether in this life or in the next, that is, the afterlife, so that they may be judged fairly by their choices in response to it. Whether they choose to live in accordance with God's will while in the flesh, or whether their circumstances are such that their obedience to God begins with receiving the word in the afterlife, enabling them to live according to God in the Spirit, as 1 Peter 4:6 says.